Welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello there, and welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. I'm John Sanders. I'm one of the co-founders of EntrePastors, and this is episode number 223 of our podcast. In this episode, we're going to be interviewing Jan Touchberry, who has a pretty cool story about serving for many years on staff in a church setting. And she talks about her kind of accidental step into entrepreneurship and how she ended up launching what has become a very successful business. And as she shares her story, we get into all the common things that pastors and church ministry-minded people deal with when they start thinking about working out in the marketplace, when they still have this strong sense of calling to ministry. Do I have permission to do this? What about what all the other people think around me? Is it okay for me to break out of this kind of church mold and get out in the marketplace and make money through a business, and a whole bunch of other things? So we're getting ready to talk about all of that in this podcast episode with Jan. Grateful to have you joining us. Without any further ado, check out my conversation with Jan Touchberry. Here we go. Well, Jan, it is my pleasure to welcome you as a guest to the EntrePastors podcast. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I love the conversation that you guys have in this particular space. It is close to my heart.
Thank you. And we are looking forward to this conversation as well, because we were introduced by a mutual friend, a friend of the show. Melissa Hughes has been a guest not only on our podcast, but she's also shown up in a few of our communities that we run here at EntrePastors, our business builders group and our starters group. Sometimes we've invited her in just to pick her brain a little bit. So share with our audience, how do you and Melissa know each other? Because any friend of Melissa Hughes is a friend of EntrePastors. So
Yeah, Melissa is fantastic. She and I met in a elite mastermind that we were in together in 2023 and became fast friends. And the short story is I created her website for her. So if you go to melissaleehughes.com, you will see the work that I do in my business. And that spun into a little bit of a business partnership that we have together. And we just are super fans of each other.
very cool. So we'll let's jump to the business side first, and then I'll jump back into some more of the ministry stuff. You have a story there as well. But tell us a little bit about the business that you do, because I have probably a number of questions that we can explore that might add value to our community. So what are you building? What are you doing? How are you serving people through business today?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll tell a little bit of the backstory. I call it my accidental business because as somebody who's been in vocational ministry, you don't think a lot of, most of the time you don't think, okay, I need to build something supplemental, although these days it's becoming more and more prevalent. But 10, 11 years ago, it wasn't.
Yeah.
And so I accidentally built a business in the network marketing space, which spun into affiliate marketing. And I'm in my day job, I like to call it, as a vocational ministry. I'm in the tech space and communication space. And so people just naturally come to me with questions about marketing and website and design and technical things, because it's easy for me and it's not easy for a lot of people. And so the way that the Lord has put my brain together, it's like, if people keep coming to me asking these questions, maybe this is a business that I should have. And so the business was born. And so right now I own an agency. It's called the Brand Collaborative. And like I said, we do web design, we do marketing. I like to say that I make websites pretty and profitable, because you can have a pretty website, but if it's not working for you, it's not working. And so I love the marketing side of things. I love lead generation. Automation is so close to my heart, because as somebody who lives in that dual world of ministry and business, our time is limited. And so we have to make the best use of our time as we possibly can. And so I'm a fan of automating as much as we possibly can. And so I love teaching people how to automate things in their business to make it more effective and fruitful for them. And so that's kind of the short version of what we do.
Let me just jump down a quick little rabbit hole there about automation. Maybe it'll turn into this massive rabbit hole. But,
Sure.
what would be, give me some examples of what are some things that as a small business owner I could automate. And I'm assuming you're specifically speaking in the realm of marketing, but when you say automation, tell me more about that because that may mean different things to different people. What can I automate in my business that will help me kind of buy back some of my time and not have to do the same thing again and again?
Sure. So more and more platforms are having campaigns that you can run. We all are fairly familiar with email campaigns. Somebody clicks on your website or the thing that you're offering, they give their email, and you have an email campaign that is automated, which is great, to take them through the customer journey, lead them where you want them to go. I am a fan of connecting that to as many places as you possibly can. For one of my favorite things to do and ways to buy back time is text marketing for people. I think that it's a little bit of, I mean, it's election season right now.
I hadn't heard.
Yeah, right. And I don't know about you, but my phone is blowing up with text campaigns. That would be a wrong example of how to use it, but I think using it in business can be super effective. So you can actually use it to remind people about appointments that they have, or events coming up, or sales that you have going on, or new offers that you have coming out. Or I help a lot of people who are coaches and things like that that deliver like weekly inspiration or daily inspiration, and you can automate that. You can sit down, you can block your time, you can schedule it out one time, and then it just goes automatically. And so it just is such a time saver. And that's my favorite automation right there.
You know what I think is awesome is that God makes different people wired with different skills and passions. Because when I hear you talk about that, two thoughts come to mind. One is this sounds really important, and then I feel like I need to go take a nap because that is so draining to me to think through those important things in a business. I'm like, I'm the big picture guy, and at EntrePastors we have an amazing team member that does those things for us. You know, Sheila Davis is kind of our marketing person, and she's building out our email sequences and the nurturing sequences and all the stuff, and
Mhm.
it's just like so important and so draining. And so I think it's awesome. I don't mean that as a put down, I mean it as a compliment.
Oh,
Like,
no.
great that there's people like you in this world because people like me need people like you.
Yes, I have become more and more aware that what I have is not a curse, but a gift.
There you go.
And I lean into that now. Whereas if you had met me probably 10 years ago, I probably would have apologized a little bit for leaning into that space. But now I
Mm.
realize that it's such a strength and it really is the way that God wired me. And when we can lean into the way that God wires us, we are so much better for it, and so is the world around us that we can have an effect on.
There you go. Okay, so let's do this then. Let's back up just a little bit. I do want to hear a little bit more about your ministry journey. You said before we started recording that you're a PK, so am
I
I. So
am.
I'd love to hear a little bit of your journey growing up in, pastoral ministry, and you've been on the inside for a long time. You've seen how the sausage is made. So I do want
Yeah.
to unpack that story. But also, maybe I want to jump to this part about at some point along the way, you began to lean into an idea that, hey, maybe I could serve people in this through business. And by the way, we often say at EntrePastors that business is simply solving problems for people. And the more you can solve problems for people, real problems that people are having, the more you can not only have an impact in people's lives, but also make money and be profitable in that business. So, walk us through a little bit more of that journey. Someone who's been in that place of ministry, and I'm going to use air quotes around ministry because often pastors, when we think of ministry, we have a very rigid and narrow view of what ministry is. It's a vocational thing, it's an office, it's a title. And the thought of doing something in addition to or outside of that very narrowly defined ministry often feels like off limits, like I don't have permission to go there. And
Mhm.
we're living in a day and age where pastors need to go there because financially the old model of just having one employer, basically the church, and being 100% dependent on the church for our income is not serving many pastors well. And so our answer at EntrePastors is let's get you out in the marketplace, let's start a business. That might not have been your initial motivation, but I'd love to just hear your journey, kind of walking into that and starting to lean into the thing that for a long time you said you would have apologized for. I'm sorry, I'm so passionate about this and keep talking about this. You learned to kind of lean into that and saw that God had something for you there. So tell us more about that.
Yeah. So, in back in 2013, I was the communications director and production director at the church that I'm currently on staff in. And um, my husband, who, as you know, person who works for the church, we have a dual income, but my husband is the primary provider because he works in the marketplace and just makes
Mm,
more money. And so he lost his job.
mm,
And it was terrifying because overnight our income was cut in half.
mm,
He was receiving unemployment, but we all know that's not much. And so you take his unemployment plus my salary, and it was still only half of what we were bringing in. And we had a daughter at the time getting married and one in college, and it was just all the things. And it was like, okay, Lord, what do we do? And he had given me, like I said, this network marketing business that I was literally dabbling in because products were working for me. People were asking about it. I'm like, okay, let's make some money. And he just blessed that during
mm.
that period of time to the point that we never missed any bill payments. We were able to pay all the vendors for the wedding. And it just, it was a 6 month time of really pressing in and praying
Yeah,
that the Lord would just bless and cause this thing to flourish that he had literally just handed to me. And it was, it's a weird space on staff when I think it's becoming more and more prevalent that people are bivocational. But in 2013, nobody, I don't think, maybe one other person on our staff had something else that they were doing on the side. And it just wasn't looked upon um, very favorably.
yeah, it's not celebrated.
No, definitely not celebrated. It was, there was talk about putting guidelines for having a second vocation in our employee manual so that we didn't cross some invisible line that we didn't even know was there.
Mm,
And it was just a weird time. And I, as the business grew and it morphed, as I was able to really realize that people are coming and asking me questions about things that I did in my church vocation, but they desperately needed help out in the marketplace. Um, one of the things I like to say is vocational ministry is ministry, but we should be ministering everywhere. I just get paid for it on this side.
yeah,
And ministry is in everybody's business. It should be. If it's not,
man,
you're doing it wrong.
yeah,
And so I just started to lean into that. And the more I leaned into it, I found that what I was previously hiding became something that other ministers on our staff were interested in. How are you doing that? What are you doing? Because I think we're all in the same space of we need more income.
yeah,
What are we going to do for retirement? How are we going to pay for college? All the
right,
things. And so when they saw what I was doing, I stopped being apologetic for it and I started really being able to step into the space of sharing how I was doing it. And just again, the way that the Lord has built my brain is that I just I hope this doesn't sound, haughty, but I think that I can sit down and talk with somebody and hear what they're passionate about, and the Lord just shows me ways to monetize that.
mm.
And so I really can step into the space with people who are desperate for some kind of financial expansion, and I can help them do that. And then I can also help them set it up and do it well so that it is profitable for them.
You know what goes through my mind when I hear you say that is, first of all, it doesn't sound the least bit haughty. It, to me, sounds like false humility to the people who would say, "Oh, you need to hide that light. You need to put that under a bushel. Don't tell anyone about that." Like such false humility. Instead, I say, let's celebrate that. It's not what's wrong about you. It's not the thing you need to hide in the dark. It's the thing that's right about you. And like you're alluding to, quite likely God gave you this as a gift in order to serve others, to build up the body, And so, yeah, at EntrePastors, like we are trying to change that narrative. Bivocational ministry is nothing new. It's been around for a long time. There's also been a very real stigma with it much of the time where it's like, hey, pastor, don't talk much about the other stuff that you do. We know we can't pay you enough to support you full time, but man, just pretend you really don't want to go do that other job. It's almost a sense of like embarrassment or shame. And, because I can't make it as a full time, quote unquote, real pastor. And it's, man, we're trying to smash that stigma here and say we are celebrating pastors out in the marketplace. Unapologetically, it's a good thing for pastors to be engaged in commerce beyond the four walls of a church building if they desire to be. And we're not prescribing it for everybody, but if God's put that in you or if there's a need that you have, again, let's find a way for you to serve others and solve problems out in the marketplace, and we can monetize that and build, money around that, build an income around that. So I celebrate everything that you're saying. Here's a question for you. Well, a couple things. One, the work that you do on staff with your church right now, is it in this same arena? Are you doing the same kind of work for them that you're also doing out in for yourself and in your business, or is there kind of a difference between your roles there?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a difference. Right now, I'm the production director. Over 21 years of being at the same church, I've worn a lot of hats. I mean,
Yeah.
anybody who's been in ministry for a long time knows that that's kind of how it goes. So I bleed over into the communication space, but mostly I design services and execute them. I work with teams of volunteers, and so the technology obviously is part of that. And so I kind of lean into that space, but mostly I call myself a people wrangler.
Yeah. And is that a part-time role for you on staff at the church, or is that a full-time gig? How does that work?
It's full time. Yep.
Okay. And then also you're building your business as well. So that's
Mhm.
awesome. Um, so the next question I was going to ask is, do you have who's your ideal avatar of a client to work with, or a business owner, entrepreneur, startup? Like, who do you love serving most? When this person calls or reaches out, you're like, yes, you're my people.
Yeah, that's a great question. I love working with small businesses, coaches, entrepreneurs that typically they're not people who are completely new to the space. They have some business established, and I love to get in there, look at what they've got going, see what's working, see what's not working, and help them fix what's not working so that they can go to the next level.
And is there a specific type of business, more of the online type of platforms and businesses, online coaches and, podcasters, that sort of thing? Or is it also like if someone came to you with a service-based business saying, man, I have a landscaping business, it's going
Mhm.
okay, but man, we'd love to, triple our income next year. Like, is that the kind of client? Are you excited about that? Or is there really a niche that you're serving in terms of a business owner?
Yeah, we've done a little bit of everything. Like we have web clients that are financial advisors, we have web clients that are realtors, we have like Melissa who owns an agency and helps speaker coaching and all the awesome stuff that she does. And then we have people who sell land. And so it really is a wide swath of things. The people that I'm really excited about working with are people who not only are trying to build this business, but are trying to introduce people to Jesus at the same time.
There you
And
go.
so I love working with believers. I would work with somebody who is not a believer as long as what they were doing doesn't go against my moral line.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, I've worked with coaches, I've worked with all types of entrepreneurs. I just love serving. I love serving the body of Christ any way
Yeah,
that I can.
awesome. Well, let's dive into a little bit of your church upbringing and just church life, because I always like to hear people's stories of what that was like for them to transition from one over to the other, or in addition to the other. So you
Mhm.
grew up, in it, man. Your dad was a pastor. How was that experience for you growing up in a pastor's home?
Yeah, this is a bit of a loaded story. So, I literally was born and raised in the church. As any PK knows, if the door is open, you are there.
Yeah.
As family, you're in it. And so, we were at church a lot. I saw the ins and outs of all the things. Um, the I think the thing that people don't realize who are not in steeped in that way as a PK is that, we see as just a normal churchgoer, you see the good, you see the Instagram worthy stuff on Sunday mornings that we want you to see as a church staff, right? You
Yeah.
don't see the badness. So, um, the humanity of it. And on a church staff, you know that you're working with a bunch of imperfect people and you see all of kind of that kind of stuff, the sausage and how it's made, as
Right.
you say. But then
Right.
as a PK, it's even deeper than that because you not only see the person that's at work, but you see the person that's at home
Yeah.
and what that looks like behind closed doors. And for me, it was not all rosy.
Yeah.
My parents ended up divorcing when I was 18,
Mm.
and that really just that whole process led me away from the church. I really thought, if this is what it is, I don't know that I want any part of it.
Yeah.
And so, I like to say my rebellious stage was short-lived. I think God was merciful in that way. Um, but I did not go to church. I didn't want to have anything to do with it for about a year. And then he so graciously, like he does, brought me back, and reintroduced me to himself,
Yeah.
through the man that would eventually become my husband.
Mm.
And, I have been in love with the church ever since.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I share a similar story, although my age is much later. It wasn't when I was 18 that my parents divorced. It was I was probably 35 or something like that, after 40 years of marriage.
Mhm.
It came out that there was some serious stuff going on there, and my I watched my dad walk away from all of it, from everything, family, ministry, grandkids, the whole 9 yards.
Mm, yeah.
I'm still thinking about having a rebellious phase, but no, I'm saying that so much. But it does rock your world though when,
Yeah,
and I was able to give some thanks to the Lord in that season that, man, if this would have happened when I was 5 or 12 or 15, like, could have had a dramatically different, impact on my life than much later. But yeah, it just points to that reality that when those who are in a place of spiritual leadership, we all know they're not perfect. We all know they have
right.
issues, and yet they still are held to a really high standard, and when they fall, there's a lot of, rubbish, left in the wake of that, a lot of broken relationships and a lot of people questioning things going, "Man, I suppose that points a little bit on us too. We put so much of our faith in human leaders when we were never
Right.
really called to put our faith in them." But, I appreciate you sharing that though, transparently, because again, the large percentage of this audience are pastors. And if
Yeah.
nothing else, that should just be an encouragement. Pastor, if we lose it on the home front, we've lost it all. It really doesn't matter how successful we are in the church arena if we don't, if we're not leading well in our own homes and having success there, it's all for nothing, really. So
Yeah,
to
that's very
keep that in
true.
perspective.
Very, very true. I think that so, you know, because we all know that church is not perfect and things happen and there's ups and downs on staff and in ministry and things like that. People, I've been on staff at the church that I'm at for 21 years, and I've had more than one person over the years say, "How are you still on staff? Why are you still here? How have you not left?" And the answer is always because the Lord has not released me.
Mhm.
And I know that we're flawed humans. We work with flawed humans. The system is flawed. Nothing is ever going to be perfect until heaven. And until the Lord releases me to go, I stay.
Yeah. And here's what I can tell you. He may release you to go from a particular assignment, but none of us get released from the church, right? I mean, none of us
Exactly.
get released from ministry. That part is a lifelong thing. We often tell our audience that, ministry is not, it's not a lifelong sentence to be a pastor. But what I mean by that is to be a pastor in the way that it's been defined. Our calling of God to serve him and to serve others is a lifelong thing, and we're never going to fully be released from that. But I'm in an interesting season of transition in my life right now as well, have been for the last number of years. For many years, my wife and I were church planters. We led and helped grow a church that was in one location, small rural South Dakota based church. We grew into 6 different multi-site locations, and it was a really cool, crazy, awesome story. And then like that, God just really started to bring me to a place of like, I think my time in this role is done. And that
Mhm.
just leads you into this huge identity crisis of, well, if that's not who I am, then who am I? And that's a lot of what's behind this EntrePastors journey is I've been kind of working my way through like and even before I stepped out of that role, there was a season where I was invited to step back into full-time firefighting in addition to being a full-time pastor. So that was a crisis with my upbringing in ministry. Like I might actually make over $100,000 a year with two full-time jobs. Now I laugh at the thought of that, but at
Right.
the time, I was like, "Is that even okay for me as a pastor to make that kind of money, having 2 full-time jobs, which either one could kill me," right? But yeah, it's been a journey for me to see like I am still in ministry. I'm just in a different season of ministry, and I'm coming to see how much ministry is available through business. Now, incidentally, I'm still on staff at a church. I still preach about once a month. I can't seem to get away from that, at least for now. But God just continues to show me that His plan is different than ours, and the boundaries are a lot farther than what we think they are. We're brought up
Mm.
in such a narrow view of what ministry looks like, what we think it is, and so if I had to boil it all down to one word for our audience, it's permission. Like you have permission to follow how God has led and wired you to do what He's put on your heart, and it may look very different from someone else's story, and that's totally okay. So, kind of circling back to your world of growing up in church life, the good, the bad, the ugly Ha was there any narratives that kinda were playing in the back of your mind as you started to, like, branch out into business in addition to ministry? And I know you weren't in that role of being the full-time lead pastor, but it's still a thing. You're still on staff. As you
Yeah.
said, you felt pressure from the system, from the church going, "Hey, we're not don't know if we really want you broadcasting to the world that you're in business. We kind of want the world to think that we own you." They might not have said it directly like that, but that's what I interpreted in what you said. So, tell me a little bit more about just that journey of going from ministry out into business.
Yeah. I will, um this gets into a little bit of the tender space, as a woman on staff full time.
Yeah.
Um, there are a lot of us, I'm assuming that your audience encompasses many of them,
Yes.
that feel, dismissed and unimportant and unheard. I sat around the table and I was the only female for a very, very long time.
Mm,
And I like to say that the countries that use elephants for work, when they're young, they put heavy chains around their feet and they're tied to trees so that they can only go so far, and they train them to only go so far. And then when they're older, even though they could easily break those chains, they don't.
yeah,
And I feel like as a woman in ministry, for as long as I've been in it, we're well, I won't generalize. I will say that I felt very much the same, that this was my space that I had to work in, to run in, and we'll only invite you into these other spaces when we feel like it's appropriate. And in business, as a female running my own business, I didn't feel that at all. People looked up to me, they respected me, they desired to know what I brought to the table, they needed what I brought to the table, they wanted to hear what I had to say, um, and I feel like we have not done a good job as the church in doing that,
yeah,
realizing how the Lord has gifted people and acknowledging that. And so the step into the business space was made for me at a time that it was a very low time in ministry for me. I was bored because I was kept in this little box.
mm,
I knew that I had so much more to offer, but I wasn't allowed to offer it.
mm,
And so I thought, they're paying me for 40 hours. I'll do what they ask me to do. I give my heart to this place. I love my church,
yeah,
but I'm also not going to not use the gifts that God has given me fully, because I feel like I mean, this is a strong statement, but I'll just say, if you're not fully living into how God created you and who God created you to be, is that a sin? And for
Yeah,
me, I was so convicted that I was not living fully into how the Lord created me and the gifts and abilities that He'd given me, that I was borderline sinning by not stepping into that space when He asked me to. And I refused to do that anymore. And so I jumped in with both feet.
that's great. I support everything you just said. And my mind goes to that story of the talents, the parable of the talents, where there is an expectation of multiplication, and I'm just inserting the excuse that maybe excuse or reason that some might give of saying, "Well, Master, I would have multiplied these
Mhm.
talents, but there was this thing in the way called the church that kept me from multiplying, that held me back." And I'm clearly adding that detail to the story. It's not in there,
Sure.
but still, it kind of makes the point. Like, is that a good enough reason? Well, my church won't let me be all that God put in me to be. Well, then I would say no. Like, you need to be and do and step into the story that God has created for you. And I really want our pastoral audience listening to this to hear that voice. Pastors, how many women are on staff or just waiting in the wings with an ability, a gifting, an insight, a perspective to share? And for whatever reason, we're not calling upon that. We're not seeing it. We're not inviting it. And so I want them to hear that. And also, kind of moving away from the gender side of it, I'll just share a small detail from my story that also resonated with me, just hearing you share that, of this theme of stepping into the full story that God created you for. In my story, Jan, as a church planter, and I didn't know back then that God had wired me as an entrepreneur. I guess I thought I was a pastor. I didn't know I was an entrepreneur. And yet, in hindsight, that sounds so silly, because I'm like, man, we were constantly launching the next location, the new thing. And that's where I was so energized. But also, because I was on staff at a very rural, small church with very real financial limitations, there were so many times where I was just like pacing the floor of my office, somewhat figuratively, at times literally, like with so much pent up energy of like, I need to go do something. And yet I felt so limited by the constraints of ministry. And I've often said, looking back now, if there would have been an EntrePastors message
Mm,
available when I was starting in ministry, that John, you can go start a business and you can be everything God made you to be, it might have led to more longevity in the church realm, because I might not have completely worn out the people of, always, there's always some new idea, always something new we're launching. I could have kind of burned off some of that energy in the business space. And so anyway, I'm just processing out loud. I don't know if I have a real point in that, but that your story resonated with me in that as well, of just sometimes being limited. And I don't know, maybe we never were supposed to put all of those eggs into this one basket called the church. Maybe the church is supposed to be more encompassing than an institution that meets in the four walls of a building and there's some business structure built around it. Maybe it's more encompassing than that. So feel
yeah.
free to respond to any of that, but I appreciate that part of your story.
Yeah. I'll just add to the story that there has been there's been some change at our church in the way that women in ministry um are invited into the space. And it's been relatively recent, I would say, over the last 3 years, that I really it was such a defining moment. I remember stepping into when the Lord really just kind of I feel like he shook me and he said, "You have been asleep too long and
Mm,
it's time to wake up and it's time to do what I've asked you to do." And I will never forget the day that I felt so compelled to walk into my executive pastor's office and say, "Look, this is how the Lord created me. This is what I have to bring to the table. I need to do this. And if it's not here, I'm afraid the Lord is going to call me somewhere else. And I really love it here."
mm.
And that day was something shifted in the atmosphere, and something shifted in the way that I think. when we show up with confidence and we show up with in the fullness of how God created us, it commands attention.
Yeah.
And you can't ignore when somebody is walking in the design for their life. You can't ignore that. It oozes from every pore of their being. And if anybody's listening and you find yourself in that space, I would just say lean in. Lean into how the Lord created you and be all that he created you to be, because it will change the way that you show up in the world.
Yeah, that is so good. That is so good. I might even use that phrase "lean in" as the title. I'm always looking for a title for these podcast episodes when I'm having the conversation. So we'll see. We'll see what that and AI come up with for a title suggestion, but I like it. So let me ask this question, kind of big picture, just encompassing all of this: ministry, business, stepping into the fullness of who God designed you to be and created you to be. What's your big dream for the next few years? What does life look like if everything's firing on all 8 cylinders and things are rocking and rolling a few years from now? Paint that picture for me.
Yeah, I feel like I've got I still have a good amount of space to, to live into how I'm supposed to serve the church. I don't feel called to leave the church anytime soon. And so I really am excited about what the Lord has for me in that space over the next decade plus. Um, but I know that retirement is looming at some point. And so I am super excited to also lean into this thing that God and I are building together that I call my business. And I firmly believe that, as pastors, we know the best how people sowing seeds into the church can affect change. And I would love to say that over the next few years, my business is thriving to the point that I don't have to draw a salary from the church, or I'm able to give and tithe so much from the prosperity that the Lord is pouring on my business that it's an example to others of what it can and should look like to sow seeds into the church and into the kingdom. And I just think that the Lord's got some big plans, and I'm just excited to walk it out with him.
I love it. That's awesome. Well, Jan, this has been a fun conversation. If somebody wanted to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that? And again, I just would call on any of our community. If you're starting a business, you feel a little bit stuck, you need help in these areas that Jan's talked about, by all means, reach out. But what's the best way for people to connect with you, Jan?
Yeah, I keep it simple. I'm Jan Touchberry, Touchberry, all the places on social media. My favorite places to hang out are Instagram and LinkedIn. And my website is jantouchberry.com. I do free discovery sessions if anybody is in a space where they just could use an ear to bounce things off of and ideas that are flowing that you need just some help in culling those and pointing you in the right direction. I'm happy to do that too. So you can find me on my website.
I love it. We will link to all of that in the show notes for this episode. And once again, Jan, thank you for your time. Thank you for the ways that you're serving God and others through the work that you're doing. And anytime, we'd love to have you back as a guest on the EntrePastors podcast. So thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.